Hey guys, and welcome to a new video. In this video we're going to be ranking the Runescape free skills from worst to best. Sit back, relax and enjoy. So before we get into ranking the skills, I just want to say a few things. This is a opinion based list, meaning that your opinion might be different and that's fine, but please do not bash my video because of it. And these skills are going to be ranked on how useful they are or how fun they are to train, in my opinion. So if a skill is more useful but it's absolutely awful to train, I might rank it just a little bit lower than the skill that is more fun and maybe a bit less useful. Now I'll be giving you guys a number for the grind and how useful the skill is from 1 to 10. 10 being it's the most useful or most fun to do, and 1 being it isn't very useful or isn't very fun to train or grind out. Anyways, let's crack on with that video, shall we? Kicking off at the worst skill in the game, in my opinion, Hunter. Now it is kind of hard to rank these skills, and the first 5 or 6 are around the same. At least in my opinion, I feel the same about those skills. Anyways, Hunter can be profitable, and it's also a fast skill once you reach the ground walls, but apart from that, it's an extremely boring skill to train, as it's not very AFK and it can be very annoying if your traps keep failing or breaking without something going in it. So for the grind, 1 out of 10, as it's awful to train in my opinion. You might disagree and you might be that one person that really enjoys Hunter, and the uses are very minimal to none, so that's why the use is also 1 out of 10. Next up is Fletching, which is an interesting skill in my opinion. It is a profitable skill if you do it the slow method, which is with magic shield bows to 99 as the last method. But it can also be very fast, but very expensive if you're doing it with broad arrows, dragon darts, ascension bolts, stuff like that. There aren't very many benefits to the skill, and that's why the use is a 1 out of 10. The grind isn't too bad, as it's semi-AFKable, and it's actually kind of fast if you're doing the expensive method, so that's why the grind is 3 out of 10. And I must say the 99 and 120 fletching capes are pretty damn sexy. Next up is woodcutting, which might be a popular skill amongst the skillers, but personally I find it awful, and it doesn't have very many uses. Now it is a very AFKable skill, especially if you're doing crystal trees or choking ivy or even elder logs for the little bit of profit, which means woodcutting is profitable. It is very minimal, and most of the time it's not going to be over 1 mil GP per hour, but there is a chance for profit if you're doing certain methods. The grind is 3 out of 10 as it's very slow and boring, and you need to have some motivation to train this skill to 99 or 120 or even beyond that. Next up is cooking, which is a AFKable skill, and it's pretty easy to do and most of the time cheap or a small profit to train, which is why it's one of the most popular 99s to achieve first. It doesn't really have any big uses, apart from that you can cook your own food if you're an Iron Man, and the higher level you have, the less chance of burning, and with the 99 cooking cape you have 0 chance of burning your food, which is useful. Now the con is, like I said, there's no real use, and Gordon Ramsay might judge you for your cooking skills. Just a warning. Next up is thieving, which used to be one of the worst skills in the game for sure, but since the safe cracking update it isn't that bad. As with safe cracking, it's pretty damn fast, it's profitable, and even semi-AFKable. Now at a higher level, at around 95 for Prif, you can actually AFK this skill on the elves, which is very very nice. And this skill hasn't really got any big uses, but as an Iron Man it can be useful to get some nice items, and with the 99 thieving cape your loot at the Prif elves is actually noted, so you can get some nice supplies. The grind is 5 out of 10 as it sucks at lower levels, but once you get higher up it gets pretty fast with safe cracking, and the use is 3 out of 10. Next up is mining, which is a AFKable skill at mid to higher levels once you unlock Menopause or the living rock cavern coal and gold, and Seraph stones of course. Now mining is okay profit with the perfect juju mining potion, as it gives you free ores. I mean pretty much free ores if you think about it, which are sent to your bank. You can also do some granite mining for some profit and some other ores, but most of the time it isn't too high in terms of profit unless you're doing harmonized ore in Prif, which is pretty damn good money. And I mean harmonized rune ore. Now mining isn't too bad to train, apart from that it's slow, but you can luckily train it with warbands and get a good amount of experience every day. So the grind is 5 out of 10 and the use is again 3 out of 10. Next up is fire making. Now you might have expected this skill to be all the way at the worst skill, but I have to disagree. As this skill is semi-AFK/AFK for at least a minute, it's cheap to train most of the time unless you're doing something crazy like Elder Logs, and it gives you a bonfire boost, which is useful for PvM as then you have more HP, and that's just good. The cons of fire making is that it is a very boring skill and it doesn't have any game-changing uses, so again grind 5 out of 10 and use 3 out of 10. The cape does look pretty good though. Next up is a skill that is widely known for its AFK-ness, if that's even a word, but this skill is very AFK and you can even make some AFK money with Sign of the Porters and urns at rocktails or swordfish. Now the nice thing about this skill is that you can also train fishing while training invention at the same time for some juicy experience gains. The only con I really have for fishing is that it is a very slow skill apart from the non-AFKable method called Fishing Frenzy. So the grind, 5 out of 10, 3 out of 10 use. I guess if you're an Iron Man, this skill is even more useful as you need to get your own fish, so fishing is a very useful skill if you're an Iron Man. Next up is crafting. Crafting is a semi-AFKable skill unless you're doing something like harps, and it can be profitable if you're making jewelry. But it can also be very expensive if you're doing something like cutting gems or making dragonhide bodies or shields. Now this skill is extremely useful and probably mandatory if you're an Iron Man, as you need to craft your own things. But if you're not an Iron Man, this skill isn't that useful, but it's an easy one to take off for Runescape. Now if you are an Iron Man watching this video or you're planning to play Iron Man, this skill can be quite annoying to train as you have to farm your own supplies for the skill. Or you have to get them through Slayer or something. Anyways, the grind 6 out of 10 and the use is 4 out of 10. Next up is smithing. Now this skill is very useful and widely known for its requirement for invention, being level 80 smithing, and you require 80 crafting and divination for invention to be unlocked. Now this skill is AFKable/semi-AFKable, can be profitable. An example would be rune bars. It's useful for ports. If you don't know what ports are, you can get the Tetsu armor, weapons, stuff like that, sea singers, and you require the smithing skill to make those, unless you buy them off the Grand Exchange, but that's the non-superior version, so that degrades to dust, and the ones of ports can be repaired. Anyways, this skill is also useful as you can make attuned crystal weapons at 90 smithing, which is also a nice bonus if you're an Iron Man and you require to have these weapons for some kind of boss or slayer task and you just need a quick tier 80 weapon. Now the only con smithing really has is that it is a costly skill most of the time, depending on what you're doing of course, unless you're doing something like corrupt ores, which are super AFK by the way, which you achieve from crystal keys, or 7-stone mining, which you can do at 89 smithing. Those are pretty nice to get 99 with, but you do require to, I believe, mine at least 2 or 3 times the experience you require in smithing for the amount required in terms of corrupted ores. Anyways, the grind is 6 out of 10 and the use is 6 out of 10 as it has quite some benefits. Next up we have farming, and I have to agree this is one of the most annoying skills to train. Unless you like farming, I don't know, at least I think this skill is awful to train, but it's a very useful skill. Now you can AFK the skill with combat after level 74 farming with Seedicide, which makes it a little less, worse or bad. But if you're training it manually, it can be quite annoying to track your trees and herb runs and stuff like that. But it is good profit with herb runs each day. In fact, multiple times a day. And it can be trained through warbands, thank God. I'm not Christian, by the way. But yeah, that speeds things up as you can do warbands daily and you can get up to 360k XP a day. So the grind is 3 out of 10 as it's pretty bad in my opinion, but the uses are pretty decent and that's why it's getting a 6 out of 10 for uses. Next up is construction, and I have to be honest, it is quite difficult to rank these skills, especially because they are pretty similar in terms of benefits. But yeah, the pros of construction are you have useful rooms like the repair stand, which can save you money compared to repairing at an NPC. The gilded altar, if you're an Iron Man, you have to do this anyway. If you're a normal account, you can use someone else's gilded altar, but yeah. And some teleports like the glory, which doesn't degrade or doesn't need a recharge, which can be useful, I guess. And this skill is extremely fast to train. You can get upwards of 2 mil experience per hour on double experience weekend. But do keep in mind this skill can be very expensive and can break the bank, and it's not very AFK. super click intensive and therefore an annoying skill to train, but the grind is 5 out of 10 and the use is 6 out of 10. Next up we have agility, one of the most hated skills in the game, but definitely a useful one in my opinion, as these shortcuts can just help you out so much and save you time. There are too many to mention, but a few examples are the one for the normal Grand Exchange, the ones in Taverley Dungeon, between Falador to get, there's too many of them. But they are useful and do save you time, and that's why it's worth training this skill. Now Silverhawks are definitely a pro because they make the skill super easy and even AFKable, and you can just train 99 agility while training another skill, which is amazing. But the con of that is that they are very expensive. Now normal agility training is 100% not AFKable unless you're doing agility pillars or the Priv agility course, which I wouldn't call AFK, more or less semi-AFKable. But yeah, this skill is awful and that's why it's getting a 1 out of 10 for the grind, but the uses are pretty good, so that's why it's getting a 6 out of 10 in terms of uses. Next up is rune crafting, which is a pretty painful skill to train, at least at the lower levels, but you can make good profit making nature runes, blood runes, cosmic runes, stuff like that in the Abyss Altar, which I do have a guide on of course, and I mentioned in my 129 and 120 rune crafting guide. Now this skill can be AFK from level 1 on at the runespan area, or you can do the Soul Altar at the higher levels, which is also AFK but does require quite some questing to do. And yeah, the grind is a 3 out of 10 and the use is a 6 out of 10, as you can make pretty good money per hour, around 2 mil I believe. And with combination runes like the mud runes, you can make even more money per hour. Next up is divination, which is profitable at most levels if you sell the energies, especially at the higher levels, and if you're doing cursed energy it's even more profitable. It's semi-AFKable because you have to click on wisps, then you can wait and put them in a rift and repeat. It is required for invention, as you require level 80 divination, crafting and smithing for invention, like said before. And it can give you access to divine locations, which can be amazing experience and money depending on which one you're doing, like the divine yew trees or divine box traps. The cape is a very good looking cape as well, and the only con this skill really has is that it is a very slow skill at the lower levels, but it does get faster with the Hall of Memories and the Gavixian Cache D&D. The grind is a 4 out of 10 and the use for the skill is a 6 out of 10. Next up we have Dungeoneering, and arguably this could be one of the worst skills in the game or one of your favorite skills. This skill is very different in terms of opinion about it in the community. Anyways, it's generally a fast skill and it can also be trained through the Sinkholes D&D, which gives you amazing tokens and experience rewards. So you don't even have to train the skill itself if you don't like it. Well, you have to do it at the lower levels, but after that you can just do Sinkholes to 99 if you wish. Now it does give you amazing rewards like the Charming Imp or the Skilling Scrolls, which you can buy for Dungeoneering tokens as a reward. It also unlocks special dungeons for skilling areas or combat/slayer monster areas, which is very, very useful. Unless of course you're just a skiller, then it doesn't really matter. Now, the cons of the skill are that this skill is pretty lame to train, but that's just my opinion. I personally think it's one of the worst skills to train in the game, but it is a fast one, and luckily there is a D&D you can do alternatively to training the skill. So the grind is a 6 out of 10 and the use is a 7 out of 10. Next up we have Prayer, being one of the most useful skills in the game to train. Now this skill is a very, very fast one, but it can also be very expensive if you do train it through the faster methods. Now what it unlocks is what makes it useful. Curses, like Soul Split, Turmoil, stuff like that. Apart from that, it also unlocks the Siren Curses if you do have the quest complete, which are amazing for skilling, as Crystallize can be very, very useful and can get you 99 Hunter even faster than before, as just an example. Now the only cons this skill really has is, like I said before, it can be very expensive to train, and it can also be a bit annoying running to Gilded Altars or doing the Chaos Altar in the wilderness. But you can always AFK at the Cleansing Crystals in Priv, aka Elf City. So for the grind, a 7 out of 10, it isn't too bad, it's pretty fast, and the uses of the skill are pretty high up, so I give it a 8 out of 10. Next up, to no surprise, the number 5 on this list being Herblore. The pros of this skill are it's very fast to train, even at lower levels. You get access to great potions like Overloads, Super Antifires, and Combination Overloads, which are amazing for any combat situation. Now the downsides to the skill are that it is a very expensive skill to train, generally speaking, and it's not very AFK compared to skills like fishing. It's semi-AFKable when you're making potions, but you do make your inventory quite fast, so I wouldn't call it AFK. Now, if you think this skill is too expensive or too annoying to train, do not worry, as you can also train it through Warbands, which is the daily D&D, which can get you up to 360k herblore experience per day. The grind is a 7 out of 10, and the uses for the skill are pretty damn high at a 8 out of 10. Next up at number 4 we have Slayer, being one of the best ways to train combat in the game, giving you good money, good charms, and great supplies if you're an Iron Man for various skills to train. Now at lower levels this skill can be very painful, slow, and boring, as you have very boring tasks at the lower level Slayer Masters, but once you get around level 85 and you unlock Abyssal Demons and higher up the Aerids or Dark Beasts, this skill goes to shine, as it gets a lot more interesting and engaging than before. And the money, charms, and supplies per hour go up immensely. And apart from that, you get access to monsters you wouldn't normally be able to kill unless you had the required Slayer level. So, the grind is a 7 out of 10, it's pretty amusing, especially at higher levels, but very boring at the lower levels. Slayer is definitely one of the most useful skills in the game, and therefore it gets an 8 out of 10. Next up, we have Summoning at number 3, and in my opinion being more useful than Slayer, as it gives you access to great PVM and skilling familiars. So this skill is useful for not just combat, but also for skilling. Apart from that, this is definitely the fastest skill to train in the game, and it's even faster on Double Experience Weekend, having you being able to get experience rates of upwards of 12 mil per hour, which is insane. The cons of this skill are pretty obvious. It is an expensive skill, and the collecting of the charms can be quite annoying, as you require charms to train this skill. But once you do get to the higher levels of summoning, this skill becomes incredibly useful. And the grind isn't too bad if you have the Charming Imp, and that's why it is at a 8 out of 10. And the skill has many uses, like I said, for PVM and skilling, and it's definitely a must skill if you're going to get into high level PVM, and that's why it gets a 9 out of 10 for uses. Next up, we have the newest skill in the game, being Invention. Now this skill is useful and very easy to train, as you can train this skill through many skills and combat. Apart from that, it's probably one of the most AFKable skills in the game, and apart from that, it's also very fast. You can get 99 and 120 pretty damn fast. I mean, seriously, you can get it fast. And apart from that, it's also useful for skilling and for many PVM situations if you have a good perk setup. Now the cons of the skill are obvious. This skill can be expensive, but it doesn't have to be, just mentioning that. And it requires skills to unlock, meaning that you can't train the skill from level 1 onwards. You require 80 divination, crafting, and smithing to unlock this skill. Now, like I said before, this skill is very AFK and easy to train, and that's why it's getting a 10 out of 10 for grinding. Now, this skill has various uses for skilling and both combat, and that's why it's getting a 9 out of 10 for uses. And the best and most useful skills to train in the game, and also the most fun in my opinion, are the combat skills. Now, I may be a bit biased here to combat, as I enjoy combat the most out of anything in the game, but for most accounts, I do believe combat is the most useful skill or skills to train up. Now, the combat skills have too many benefits to mention, but the main ones are it's useful for making money, and the higher level stats you have, the easier you can do Slayer or bossing to get money. If you want to get into bossing, you require decent combat stats as well. If you want to save time by using teleports or just using some useful teleports, you require a higher magic level, and therefore magic is very useful. It's also very fast to train the combat stats. It's usually AFK if you're doing the right methods, which are most of the time also the fastest ones, the AFKable ones I mean. It's cheap most of the time, depending on what you're doing of course. And in my opinion, if you aren't AFKing, this is the most engaging skill in the game, combined with Slayer of course. The only downside to combat in my opinion is it levels your combat level, and if you're a skiller, you don't want to do that of course. But if you're not a skiller, the only downside is that combat can be slow at lower levels, but once you get to the mid levels, it's very easy and extremely fast. So in terms of grinding, a 10 out of 10 in my opinion, and in terms of uses, they're super, I mean there's just so many. So 10 out of 10 for that as well. But that pretty much concludes this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like down below and maybe even consider subscribing. And I'll catch you guys later. Peace.
I'm never gonna stop, yeah. One shot, that's all you got. Take it right now, before you get lost, yeah. One shot, that's all you got. Write your own story, you control the plot, yeah. One shot, that's all you got. Could drop dead